How is the Inflation Reduction Act going to reduce inflation? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we address that question.
Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle. The show that y'all know brings you the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy, especially in the context of the burning issues of the day. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who's once again teaching at the Citadel, economics. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you and good to be with our viewers and listeners. Yeah, today is the first day of classes in the new academic year, fall of 2022.
Yeah, you're gonna have to go back to work again, I guess, huh?
Damn.
Oh, well, and I put work in quotation marks, of course.
Okay, viewers and listeners, this is the kind of abuse, underappreciation, uninformed attitudes from Hornberger that I've had to deal with for decades. My level of patience and calmness is amazing.
Yeah, I would just say to our viewers, how would you like a job where you only teach 2 courses and get to relax the whole rest of the week? I mean, that's the cushiest job I've ever heard.
Relax. This guy, relax. He sits at home and he's writing his little articles and he chit chats with me once a week. Give me a break.
I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders, Richard. Me and Atlas. All right, Richard. One of the burning issues of the day is the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, this thing, it takes the cake. I mean, we've seen a lot of strange, unusual, bizarre things in the many decades that we've been libertarians, but this has got to clearly rank at the top or near the top. The Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, even just the name of it makes you think that inflation is just this external force that has hit our nation and that the government is mobilizing its resources. The Biden administration is getting Congress to rally the troops in order to fight this invading infection. I mean, it's like the coronavirus, COVID or something. It's like, oh my gosh, inflation has hit our country and we need to pass a law to reduce inflation. And of course, what they're concerned about and what they're using as the excuse is the rising prices across the board that you see, especially in the gasoline pump. They know people are upset about that. So they say, oh, let's pass a law and just call it the Inflation Reduction Act. But what's really fascinating about this is that it doesn't really address inflation at all. I mean, we all know as libertarians and as Austrian economists that inflation is a product of the Federal Reserve. It's called inflation because they're inflating the money supply. They've been doing this for decades. They've been doing it since the inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913. They just print more and more and more money. That debased currency has to be reflected somehow. I mean, when you're flooding the economy with additional supplies of money, that means the value of that money is dropping. And the only way that's going to be reflected is by rising prices of the things that money buys. And so that's why you have the rising prices across the board, gasoline, groceries, and so forth. Now, why does the Federal Reserve do this? Well, because government spending is out of control. We know that. They've been, for years and years, decades, they've been spending more than what they bring in with taxes. So the debt that the federal government's been incurring, now this is for their welfare and their warfare, that the debt that's been incurring is now up to about 30 trillion or so, which I forget amounts to like $250,000 per taxpayer, something like that. Well, in order to pay off that difference, the deficit, they've can tax people. I mean, they're borrowing it, but ultimately that debt's got to be repaid. but people don't like additional taxes. And so that's where the Federal Reserve's job comes in. It just is effectively printing the money to pay off this debt. That's what they've been doing for decades. So the problem is really massive, out of control federal spending. So what do they do with this law? They say, well, yeah, we are concerned about this deficit, but instead of slashing the spending, they're hiring a bunch of IRS agents. They're allocating unbelievable amounts. I forget what it is, the millions they're spending to hire more IRS agents to harass the American people with the objective of sucking more money out of their pockets. Now, they say it's only going to land on the rich, the audits and the harassment and so forth, but that's nonsense. You know, the rich are able to protect themselves with lawyers and accountants and so forth. They're going to go after the low-hanging fruit, which is the middle class. Middle class can't afford to fight the IRS. If they say you owe an extra $1,000, you're going to write the check. You're not going to go out and hire a law firm. So the more money they extract out of it, they're saying, oh, well, we're reducing the deficit. They're not going to reduce the deficit. The federal spending is just going to continue growing and growing and growing the way it always does. Then not only that, but they're actually spending more money on things like climate change and so forth. So at the same time that they're getting the IRS to harass people, they're increasing government spending. And of course, doing nothing about the Federal Reserve. There's no even mention of the Federal Reserve. So this is where public schooling, Richard, I see intersects with all this nonsense, is that they're dealing with bubus Americanus here. I mean, you've got millions of people that are graduates of the public school system that are buying into this. To them, it all makes sense. The government's fighting inflation with this Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, it's just a weird phenomenon. But in public schooling, they teach you, oh, defer to government officials, especially on things like inflation. They know what they're doing. They're the expert. Don't try to figure this out for yourself, Bubus Americanus. You just go along with the program. And so once again, we see the fleecing of Bubus Americanus and the fleecing of all of us, because we all pay a price for this, that ultimately people have to realize that what's going on here is massive out of control spending on both the welfare and the warfare state, and it's being financed, enabled by the Federal Reserve, this socialist central planning institution in the monetary arena. What's your take on it, Richard?
I'm so glad they passed this bill. I look upon Joe Biden as a savior. Oh no, that's the other show I participate in. Sorry. This is outrageous. This whole it's Orwellian, okay? Where you now call a rise in taxes, an increase in government spending, an inflation reduction. Whereas you're saying it has nothing to do with the root cause of this, which is this huge and exorbitant increase in the quantity of money and credit through the Federal Reserve over the last years, the decade. That's the source of it. So like George Orwell in his novel 1984, you have this newspeak, as he called it. Love is hate, war is peace. Now higher taxes and more government spending is anti-inflation, when it has nothing to do with it. And I think we should emphasize the following. What is the government spending this money on? Well, on the one hand, they're going to have to be spending more money because they're hiring 80,000 more IRS agents. And in the ads that they've been putting out to attract possible candidates to join the IRS, there is a part of this that says willingness to carry a firearm and use lethal force.
No.
This is, I don't know if they use the word lethal, but to use the firearm. And the reason being is, oh, these right-wing nuts, they hate the government and they're threatening IRS agents. We may have to defend ourselves against those who are not willing to pay their fair share. So now they're hiring people who are expected to either be trained already or to be willing to have training to use a violent weapon to intimidate the taxpayer if necessary, to see that there is no verbal or other opposition to the increasing extortion and plundering of the American people. Furthermore, what are they spending this money on besides that? Oh, this is the biggest amount of money, over $350 billion on fighting climate change. A huge amount of this is going for wind power, solar power. These are government boondoggles, government boondoggles. You don't have to be a technician or an engineer or a hyper, natural science scientist to just read some of the literature to know that there is no way, shape, and form that solar power and wind power have the capacity to make up for the diminished use of fossil fuels. We will be an energy poorer society. We will not be able to sustain the standards and the quality of life and the manufacturing levels that the U.S. government, the U.S. society is able to do in spite of all of the other government regulations. This is a step backwards against economic progress. It is retrogression if this is implemented. Right now, I'm blanking out. Some country in the world, major country in the world, that is relying upon amounts of wind power that they put these things up. They're having a dry season with no wind. They're having to cut back and threaten rationing of power because there's not enough wind. Well, this is America's future. All that has to happen is a period of time when the wind is not strong enough to turn the turbines. And guess what? You may have blackouts. You might have to see factories slow down and shut down for periods of time. This is the future that they want. There's a phrase, there's no gain without pain. For those who believe in the central planning of the economy, pain is both the means and the end. You're to suffer. You're to feel guilty for prosperity and opportunity and quality of life because that is against the planet and all the living creatures on it. Yes, it's more important to preserve a tadpole than your kid who may have to suffer a lack of an operation in a hospital because the power has been shut off. These people are crazy. Now, one other point, if I can make about this, Jacob, it's not only the economic irrationality of what they want to spend it on. It's a huge vested interest, special interest giveaway. To whom will this money go to? Large, politically connected businesses, enterprises, corporations. This is crony capitalism at work from all of the lefties who are saying, oh, corporate America is too powerful. Oh, corporate America exploits people. Oh, corporate America is the enemy of the little guy. They are the financiers of these special interest groups who have nothing to do with a real free market, a real free enterprise system. These are the people who eat at the trough of government under the rationales of making this better or improve that, because they are unwilling or unable to earn an honest dollar effectively in the open competition of an unrestricted free market. This is just an extension of the interventionist welfare state, with a large part of this under the name of what goes sometimes as the crony capitalism or corporate welfare. That's who the left is buying off this time, with guarantees of a certain amount of breadcrumbs for other special interest groups that ideologically the left is dependent upon in Congress. This is the reality of it. It is a further step towards further government control, further government extortion of the public, further government regulation, further government planning, and further government corruption of the society by drawing more people who have not been there before or to a greater extent to eat at the trough of government spending, and therefore link them to the plunderers and exploiters of the American people, who are those who have political control and the ability to determine your fate through the powers that they have.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think in addition to the wind power that they might be able to get more power by using the hot air coming out of Washington? Sorry, Richard.
One advantage is that it used to be the case that Congress was not in session for most of the year. And that was because before air conditioning, the spring and the summers and the early autumn were often too hot for the politicians to stay in Washington, D.C. So one positive side effect is that if the energy environment collapses and they don't have enough wind and solar power to heat all of the facilities or air condition all the facilities in Washington, D.C., they may have to extend their vacations and maybe add to the days in which they're not picking our pockets or telling us how to live our lives.
That would be
I'm
awesome.
almost willing to pay them to stay home to leave me alone.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think it's important to point back to the founding principles of this country, not the bad ones like slavery and so forth, but to point to the good ones, just so people will have a frame of reference as to what happened here. I mean, we know that America is just mired in this morass, this state of morass. We've got the foreign policy crises that are ongoing. I mean, we've lived under foreign policy crises on a continuous basis all of our lives, Richard. If you know, you're going back to the Cold War environment and so forth, and notice that they're out of Afghanistan, but they're getting more money than when they were in Afghanistan, and they got plenty of money to go over there and furnish the Ukrainian government with it. I mean, it's amazing how they're able to find all this money when they're broke. And of course, that's why they need these IRS agents is to suck more money out of the private sector in order to fund these big boondoggles. And then you've got the massive welfare state. But I think it's important to recognize that one of the good founding principles of this country is there is no IRS. There is no income tax. You keep everything you earn. And so when you have that kind of society, and we had that kind of society for more than 100 years, maybe like 125 years, the citizen is in charge. He is the sovereign. He keeps everything he's earned. There's nothing the federal government can do about it. And so the federal government essentially becomes a servant, and the citizen is the master. He's retaining his resources. Once they enact it, and that system lasted, like I say, for 125 years or so. Once they adopt the national income tax and they get this vicious agency called the IRS to enforce it, the whole relationship is upended. Now the citizen becomes the servant. When they're going to hire 86,000 new IRS agents to come and harass the American people with one objective, Richard, and that's extracting more money out of the private sector to fund all this welfare, warfare statism. The citizen is the servant at this point. You know, who's going to object? How can the citizen object when that well-armed IRS agent comes in and says, I'm putting liens on your property. I'm going to take your property away unless you fork over $5,000 to us. And so you've got this serfdom society. You know, Friedrich Hayek wrote this book, I guess it was in 46 or so, called The Road to Serfdom. Pretty famous book among libertarians. Well, he was talking about the road to serfdom. I think everyone would acknowledge, at least among the libertarians, is that the end of that road was reached a long time ago. We live in a serfdom society. And then you've got the Federal Reserve. America lived without a Federal Reserve from the beginning of the United States all the way to 1913 without a central bank. You look at the paper money system. Well, America had a gold coin, silver coin standard. It was established in the Constitution. Gold coins, silver coins, that's the official money. Now, sure, you had debt instruments, bills, notes, and so forth, but everybody understood these were debt instruments. They were used as money substitutes, but everybody understood they were promises to pay money. It was the most unique system in history. So a monetary system, no Social Security, no welfare state, no warfare state, no Pentagon, CIA, NSA. I mean, everything got upended in the 20th century. And the system hasn't quite worked out very well, has it, Richard? I mean, you look where they are now, you know, hiring 80,000 IRS agents to come after us. It's incredible what's going on here.
I'll just point out, you know, for the viewers and listeners who maybe don't understand what you were pointing out about, you know, gold and silver was viewed as the money, and currency, paper money, was a claim to that. Is that if you have a Federal Reserve note in your pocket, whether it be a $20 bill, a 10, a 5, a 1, whatever, it says on the top of here, Federal Reserve note. What does the word note mean? It means a claim, an obligation, a promise to pay back. That's because at one time, this was not the money. This was a symbol or a representation of the money, as a claim that the real money, the gold and silver, had been deposited into a financial institution, a bank, and that during normal business hours, you, as the owner of that gold and silver money, could at any time go into that establishment and redeem it at face value. And that this merely was a means of convenience, of not having to carry around the bulky gold and silver coins, the heavy bars, the bullion for the everyday exchanges and business transactions of the day. This was viewed as a claim to facilitate the ease of monetary exchanges. But that was it. But today, suppose you go into the bank, and I'll do it with this one, and have a dollar bill here, a $1 bill. There's George Washington. And I go to the teller and I say to her or him, I would like what this represents. That teller is going to give me 4 quarters. And I'll say, no, I want what this represents. And I turn back the 4 quarters, and he or she gives me 10 dimes. And I say, no, I don't want, I want it what it represents. And I give back the 10 dimes, and she gives me 20 nickels. And I say, no, I want what it represents. And I give her the 20 nickels back. She gives me 100 pennies. And I say, I don't want that. I want what this represents. And I turn back the 100 pennies, and she gives me one of these. Okay, that's what it is. It's nonsense. Okay, and that is basically what is important in understanding this, which you were bringing out towards the beginning. The government spends this huge amount of money every year, and the Congressional Budget Office is projecting that for the next 20 years and beyond, we will not see an end to the, at a minimum, $1 trillion a year budget deficits. $1 trillion a year of spending in excess of revenues by taxes taken in by the federal government. And where will that $1 trillion come from? Yes, they'll issue bonds and notes and bills. That's just government securities of various maturity dates. And they'll issue them. But that would be borrowing money from you and me. And that if that were the end of it, there's no inflation. Because if you borrow a $20 bill from me, for the period of the loan, I have $20 less in my pocket, and you have $20 more in yours. I have merely transferred the use of purchasing power for that period of time of the loan. But then that's basically meaning extracting more wealth from the private sector. But rather than do that, the Federal Reserve comes along and says, you know that government IOU, that government security that you lent Uncle Sam, we'll buy it from you, and we'll pay for it with money. And they transfer some amount of money in exchange for the face value of that security. And where does the Federal Reserve get the money to pay for that government security? They just create it out of thin air. Either they print it the old-fashioned way, or it's just added as a ledger book number on the computer screen that enables that to be recorded as well. There's this much more money in the economy for banks to lend and then people to spend. This is the fraud of it behind. And this Inflation Reduction Act, which you were highlighting and I tried to amplify a bit, has absolutely nothing to do with the rising prices in the economy. All rising, but to different degrees and to different amounts with all their own distorting effects. It has to do with more money being created so that over time the money percolates through the economy, everybody has more dollars to spend with, and trying to buy things, the people competing with all these extra dollars end up in one shape, form, or another bidding up the prices. The Federal Reserve is behind this, and this Inflation Reduction Act has nothing to do with it. It is a con, it is a ruse to hide what they're really about, which is where we began with in your opening comments, and that is about raising taxes, increasing government spending, and serving special interest groups for the political purposes of those who have power in Washington.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that the framers, when they call the federal government into existence, they understood exactly what we're talking about here. And so did the American people, because the Americans were really the ones that had to, at some point, approve this experiment that was being called by the Constitutional Convention. To call the federal government into existence. They had been operating under the Articles of Confederation for, I don't know, more than 10 years, where the federal government didn't even have the power to tax. much less the power to print money and so forth. But during the Revolutionary War, they had the Continental, the printed money, and massive inflation because they were just printing more and more of the money in order to spend it. The government was spending it to pay for the war effort. So when they set up this gold coin, silver coin standard, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to prevent what is happening today by establishing the system, because the government can't print gold and silver. They can only print money, paper money. And so they knew exactly what they were doing, and that system lasted for more than a century. I mean, I don't think it was that burdensome. If you take, let's say, a 1 ounce gold coin today and put it in your pocket, that's effectively, $1,700-$1,800 with just a 1 ounce gold coin. That's carrying around $1,700 or $1,800. That's not real burdensome. But what really matters here is that they didn't want government to have this power, the power that it has today. Everything changed in the 20th century. And the reason the Fed had to be brought into existence is they knew that with the welfare state and later the warfare state, the national security state, that federal spending would go out the roof, out of control spending on both welfare and warfare. They needed the central bank, the Federal Reserve, to print up the money to accommodate the debt, because they always knew they were going to end up spending more than what they were bringing in with taxes. And now the Federal Reserve is panicking like it always does. It's raising interest rates. But, Richard, I could be proven wrong, but I think they're bluffing, because I see them caving on the horizon. Why are they going to cave? How else are they going to deal with this massive debt? As you point out, the deficit of what they're spending every year is going to be another $1 trillion added on to the 30 trillion, 31 trillion, 32 trillion. How are they going to pay off this debt? It seems to me they have to print the money to pay off this debt. I don't see them getting to a point where we're just going to have to raise people's taxes to pay off this debt. And then they've got the election coming around, the midterms, and then right after that, the presidential election. Do the Democrats really want this gigantic recession that's bound to come with the dramatic raising of interest rates? I think the pressure is going to be so enormous on the Federal Reserve that I think they're going to end up caving. That's my prediction. I could be proven wrong. I think it's also important to note that silver coins were still circulating in this country when you and I were kids. You had silver quarter. Now, gold wasn't, because ironically, they made it illegal for Americans to own gold. Imagine, this was the official money of the United States under the Constitution for more than a century, and they succeed in making it a felony offense to old gold coins, if that's not weird. But they didn't do it with silver coins. And when we were kids, you still had silver quarters that you could get and just in circulation. You'd go to the soft drink machine or whatever and put in a silver quarter. You wouldn't think twice of it. But as they kept printing the money and then printing these or coining these cheap alloyed coins, it drove the good money out of circulation, just the same as Gresham's law said it does. Bad money will drive good money out of circulation. You'd be stupid to take a real silver quarter and put it into a soft drink machine, or put 4 of them in there to buy a dollar drink. You keep the silver and go sell it. And you can make a heck of a lot more money than you can just using it as a soft drink machine. That's what they've done to our money, Richard. They have debased this. And that's what inflation really is, the inflation of this money supply. It's really a tax, Richard. It's an indirect, surreptitious, fraudulent tax. And it's as fraudulent as this Inflation Reduction Act is.
Well, perhaps scarily reminding me of how old I'm getting. I too remember when you still had those silver quarters circulating, but I also was beginning to teach. I was in graduate school, but I was teaching classes, and you could still find the old silver quarters in circulation. I don't have any of those anymore. They're gone a long time ago. But I would go into class and I would take 2 quarters. I would take one that was still silver. They still hadn't pulled them all out, through a process of out of circulation, and one that had the silver, cover, but basically it was the nickel or whatever, copper alloy, whatever's in there. And I would stand in front of the class, I have the desk there, and I would drop the full silver quarter and have it like a strong, hard sound to it. And then I would drop the new quarter, and all you got was like this cheap tinny sound. And I would say, which quarter would you want to have? Which quarter is the real money? But yeah, but that you see, and the kids got that. You see, the students got that. But now I drop both of these. They're both the cheap old alloy coins, so they both sound tinny. You don't have that solid sound anymore of dropping that quarter on the desk, and boy, that's the sound of silver.
No, there's something about real money that really it resonates with people. I mean, you look at the gold coins, the Double Eagle, the St. Gaudens gold coins, and beautiful, beautiful money. I mean, and the United States had one of the best systems in the world. Now, you and I would call for a denationalization money, a free market monetary system. Let the free market decide the money. But the second best was the system they established. And despite the fact that it was the government coining the money, there was never an instance where there was fraud here. In the olden days, the kings would shave the edge of the coins, and when they would come in with payment of taxes, and then they would melt the shavings down to create a new coin. So they'd have two coins now to go out and spend money, but it would leave the original coin with less than an ounce or whatever it was. And that was the inflation of that time. And when people realized it and they said, well, we're not going to accept that coin at face value, the king would get furious and say, oh, you're impugning the integrity of the king. We're going to have to make this legal tender and put people in jail. Well, that's how we got legal tender laws. So it was a sound financial system that we had, sound monetary system. It was one of the major reasons for the tremendous upsurge in the standard of living of people in America in the late 1800s, like from 1870 to the early 1900s. I mean, it was an incredible period of time. No income tax, no welfare state, no drug law, no immigration controls, no central bank. You had gold coins, silver coins. It was an amazing period. And I think looking back at that period provides us with a clue as to what has gone wrong, why we're in such desperate straits today. And it seems to me, Richard, that if this doesn't cause people to wake up, the Inflation Reduction Act with 86,000 IRS agents, if this doesn't cause people to wake up and discover libertarianism and Austrian economics, I don't know what will.
Well, I don't like to make predictions, but I believe that these episodes are learning opportunities and learning experiences. When price inflation is measured by the consumer price index is increasing at 0.5%, 1% a year, people can be irritated, but it really doesn't hit them in the face. But when the monetary mismanagement is generating a measured price inflation, again by something like a consumer price index of 9.5% a year at an annualized rate, that will start getting people's attention. And it is an opportunity to explain to them why it's coming about, how it comes about, and why it is harmful and detrimental to them and their future and that of their children. It's one thing if you have $100 and you spend it today. And price inflation, again, is measured by a CPI, goes up by 1% during the year. So a year later, whatever you bought previously for $100 is now $101. Yeah, you might notice it, but who cares? It's $1. But now, what cost you $100 a year ago is, at this annual rate, going to cost you almost $10 more, $110 compared to the 100. Well, I don't know about all the viewers and listeners out there, but a lot of people are going to notice that something costs almost 10% more now than just a year earlier. That's a learning experience.
Well, it is, and it's just a tax. They've essentially just put a 10% tax on people. I mean, imagine if they said we're going to raise your income taxes 10%.
People would pay attention.
Exactly.
But this is the thing is that and the Democrats and the other lefties have been doing this. It's the greedy corporations. It's the greedy businessmen. It's the money-grabbing oil companies. You see, they point to the people who are merely reflecting in their prices the consequences of the Federal Reserve's own monetary mismanagement. So in other words, when enterprises have to raise their prices because of the monetary inflation that the central bank has caused, what do? They blame the messenger, the businessman who, through his pricing of goods, is informing people that a monetary abuse has been going on, and that's the consequence.
And that's the brilliant part of it from their perspective,
Yes.
is that because people don't suspect that this is a big con, it's a big fraud on them that the government officials are perpetrating on them.
Right.
And hopefully they'll wake up. I mean, like you say, that's enough to get somebody's attention at 10%. I mean, if you're in Venezuela or something, it's 90%. So that's enough to get people's attention there. Hopefully we won't head in that direction. All right, Richard, we've wrapped things up. We'll need to wrap things up. If you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org. We got, 32 years of principled arguments. We got Richard's great book, Monetary Central Planning in the State. Subscribe to our FFF Daily, our monthly journal, Future of Freedom, to this YouTube channel, our Twitter account. And Richard, I look forward to seeing you next week, and I've greatly enjoyed the conversation as always.
Until next time.